Chapter 8. Seperation. Margaret spent most of the following morning packing her trunk, which was to be called for early in the afternoon by Mr. Sims, the drayman. She was leaving for home on the afternoon train the next day from Dawiak on the Michigan Central Railroad, but the trunk would leave from Benton Harbor, go to Chicago, and be transferred to the Michigan Central when her train left that terminal at 10 o'clock in the morning. When Margaret finished packing, she came downstairs and found her aunt busily baking in the kitchen. Margaret was so glad to find her alone. She had so much she wanted to tell her. Mrs. Cliver listened attentively and seemed pleased that her niece's visit had ended so happily. "You are fortunate to have found such a fine young man," she volunteered. "I think your trip out here this summer was providential, but I'm wondering what your mother is going to say about it when you get home." "Thank you, Auntie, for feeling as you do," Margaret said. "You have been very dear to do so much to encourage our courtship. I appreciate your interest in us. I'm not worried a bit over what Mother is going to say." "It's going to be hard on both of you to be so far apart," her aunt added. Then she reiterated the statement she had made a few days before. "Your visit here is like the end of a perfect day, isn't it?" Margaret put her arms around her aunt's shoulders and placed a kiss on her cheek. Then she left the room to join her uncle, who came to the door to say that he would walk down to the passenger station with her to buy her a ticket. That way she would have no delay when they went to Dawiak the next day, if they should be pressed for time. Her reservation on the Pullman had already been made, and she had that ticket in her handbag. She was assigned to coach number 501. That evening her aunt served a delicious chicken dinner just to celebrate Margaret's last big meal with them. The Clivers had done everything possible to make her stay memorable. That evening she expected her suitor to come again. He had told her last night that he would come to make final plans for going with her to Dawiak in the morning. No, he wasn't going to drive. He had a little trouble with his car lately, and it did not seem wise for him to take her in that. Besides, it was not necessary. There was to be a Baptist conference in Dawiak that same day, and another minister was planning to take Reverend Cliver in his automobile, so they could just as well kill two birds with one stone, they said, and take Margaret to the train at the same time. Lloyd was late in coming that evening, and about 7:30 Margaret began to be uneasy about him. She possessed a vivid imagination that could think of all kinds of terrible things that might have befallen him. She kept going to the front window to see if his car was coming. At last she looked out and saw him walking up the sidewalk. His car had refused to run. After making every effort to start it, he finally gave up and started to walk the 4.5 miles to the parsonage. This was their last chance to be together, and he knew that Margaret would be disappointed if he did not come. Fortunately, one of the neighbors was driving to town, and he gave Lloyd a ride after he had walked only 1/4 mile. They had both hoped to drive over to the lake once more for a final look at Lake Michigan. By now, Margaret had learned to love that enchanting body of water as much as Lloyd did. The night before, they had planned to go over to Higman Park on their last night together and watch the moon set. Now they couldn't go there. But what was stopping them from taking the streetcar over to St. Joseph and going on the beach near the pumping station? When Lloyd suggested it, Margaret was immediately agreeable. At least they would be alone, and that's what they wanted more than anything else in the world. They walked down the hill to the beach just as the sun was setting. There was a glorious sunset, which portended a good day on the morrow. The two young lovers sauntered along on the moist sand where the water was lapping up on the shore, and stopped occasionally to pick up a flat stone to skip in the lake. By the time they arrived at the pumping station, there were still a few streaks of bright pink left in the sky, and the moon was hanging high on the western horizon, casting a golden path in the rippling water as darkness settled over the lake. They sat for a while on the breakwater, and then decided to find a beach a little ways from the shore. No one else appeared to be anywhere around. The beach was deserted this time of night, as far south as the pumping station. This was the reason they had come so far down. They wanted to be alone. There were no street lights nor any other kind of illumination, only the moon, which was now about in its first quarter, and there to shed its light and benediction upon them. As they sat quietly beside the lake, listening to the water lap lazily up on the shore, Their thoughts drifted into the future, and they began to talk about their home to come and their duties as husband and wife. Children also entered into the picture, and they were both happy that each would love to have a family. Margaret confided that she always hoped to have a family of 4, equally divided, 2 boys and 2 girls. Then Lloyd asked her how long she thought they ought to wait until they actually considered themselves engaged. "I've been thinking about that too," Margaret replied. "I think we should wait until after you have seen my mother. After all, that is only proper, you know." "I've been thinking the same thing," he responded. "When do you think you can come east?" she asked. "Not until after the fall work is all done, perhaps in November," he said. "Why don't you plan to come for Thanksgiving? Wouldn't that be fun?" Margaret queried. "I'll do my best," he answered. "It's going to be hard to be apart so long." Then they talked about how long they should wait before getting married. "Do you think we could wait 2 years?" he asked her. "I have an obligation to perform on the farm, but I am quite sure that if all goes well I can arrange to leave the farm in 1921. "How I wish you could go to college again and prepare for the ministry," Margaret said hopefully. "I've always wanted to be a minister's wife. Now you're the only one that can make that dream come true. Besides," she exclaimed, "you have the qualifications for a minister." "How nice of you to say it," he remarked. "I knew you'd make a good minister's wife too, but I'm afraid that would be impossible now. I'm going to have to get a job when my 2 years of probation are up on the farm, so I can support a family of my own." "Our own," he hastily corrected himself. "So you will," Margaret replied. "We'll just have to let the time to take care of that." Then after a moment of silence she added resolutely, "But you even look and act like a minister. I know you will be one day," she added prophetically. With that, they walked hand in hand out of the park and back up the hill to the streetcar. They just missed one. It went by as they were approaching the steps at the foot of the hill. At any other time this would have been aggravating, but tonight it only meant that they could be together an extra half hour. When they arrived back at the parsonage at 10:30, they found Aunt Mattie up writing letters. Lloyd did not come in as it was too late, and he had to walk home, which would make it nearly midnight before he arrived back at the farm. When Margaret asked her aunt if she cared because she went out on this final night of her visit, which she promptly replied, "No. I think I know you both pretty well. I'm sure I can trust you. To tell the truth, I was not at all worried about you. I wanted you to see as much of each other as possible while you were here." Then she added, "You're going to be separated for a long time, you know." With this certain prediction, Margaret went up to her bed to try and get rested before leaving home. She knew she would get very little, if any, sleep the next night on the train, even though she was going to take a sleeper. It was hard getting to sleep with the stimulation of the events of the past 2 days. Yesterday, Lloyd had proposed to her. Tonight, he had flattered her by pointing out all the many things he liked about her. Best of all, he had persuaded her that it was not flattery. He was speaking the truth, he said. She vowed then that with God's help she would try to live up to his expectations of her. The next morning everyone was up at 6:30, including Margaret. She put the final touches on her wardrobe and neatly combed her dark brown hair, putting it back into a trim pug at the nape of her neck. After breakfast she walked to school with Ewan. It was hard for them to part, as they had been together for 9 weeks. When Lloyd came at 8:30, one of the trustees who had come to the parsonage to inspect the furnace began to kid Lloyd and said, "She'll cost you money yet," to which Lloyd promptly replied, "She's worth money, man." At this silly remark, Frances began to giggle and laugh so hard she cried. Rev. Frank Curry, the former Baptist minister, arrived soon after, and soon Margaret was kissing her aunt and cousins goodbye as others walked out to the car. Her uncle got in front with Mr. Curry, which left the back seat for Margaret and Lloyd. The conference, which the 2 ministers were to attend, began at 10, and Margaret's train did not leave until noon, giving the 2 young people nearly 2 hours to be together before train time. Most of the time was spent visiting in the park across from the railroad station. When they finally went into the station, they each got weighed. Lloyd put a nickel in the slot and tipped the scales at 155, and Margaret weighed only 118. They had both lost weight in the past 3 weeks, but they brushed all seriousness of that aside. ascribing it to lovesickness, of which they both realized they had a strong case. Before the train came, Lloyd suggested that every Wednesday night at 6 o'clock Eastern Time she faced the west, and he would face the east, and think of each other. "And the east and west shall meet," he quoted. The train pulled in on time. Margaret was the only passenger to board it, and since there was no baggage to be put on, the stop was short. They scarcely had time to kiss goodbye. Lloyd carried her valise and hurriedly gave her a farewell embrace as he put her on coach 501. The conductor immediately called, "All aboard," and they were off. Margaret stood for a moment in the vestibule so she could wave to her lover and watch him until he disappeared out of sight. "Thus ended," she wrote, "my happiest of all good times spent with the very best man in all the world." This trip for both of them was the beginning of a life filled with love for each other and for their fellow man.